Live.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
This is great.
All right.
Ah, this is so cool. I'm so happy to have you here, Jonah. Did you get a chance to watch the episodes that I sent you?
I saw the first three that
The
you
first three, okay. What'd you think of
yeah.
this?
I mean, it's so interesting, especially in light of the whole Lord of the Rings thing. Like the imagery, I was already thinking Lord of the Rings in my mind. So Ryan, this was Clone Wars season.
It was basically I sent her the Mortis arc, the 3 episodes of the Mortis arc. Yeah,
nice.
And so they like pop into this alternate dimension with you. I'm sure you know exactly everything that happens in the episode just from hearing the title.
Yes.
But it's like the father and the son and the daughter in this like space outside of space and time outside of time kind of thing. And so I was already thinking about Lord of the Rings when I was watching it, and like the whole malevolent force that's larger than life and having to descend to the depths of the lava and lava swallowing things, and super interesting.
And like the symbolism of the altar and the what was it called? The altar of, it's like the altar of souls and the wellspring. I think it was like the wellspring of life and the altar of souls. There's like these two like there's just so many like symbolic things. I was trying to think of like if I could ask you to watch anything to prep for tonight, I'm like, what would it be? I'm like, what would be like the easiest thing to be a self-contained like series? Like, because there's so many other things you could watch, but what would be super self-contained and kind of easy to consume? And I was thinking, okay, the Mortis arc, because it has all of the like Anakin's the one, but he learns it and then he doesn't, and then all these other the god presence, and then out of time, and then like okay, it's all just contained in 3 episodes. Let's just do that.
So I'm like really excited, Jeff. I feel like you might have been reading my mind. So I'm currently like I don't have like a good verb for this other than my wife will often say like, oh, you're Star Warsing, or so right now I am Lord of the Ringsing, and I don't know why it's happened, but I will say like it was easy for me to build this backdrop, that I love the Lord of the Rings, and for whatever reason I know that the Amazon trailer for Rings of Power just came out, and so I'm
have you watched it?
Oh, like 1,000 times.
Joanna, have you watched it?
No, I haven't.
Oh my god. So did you even know they were making a series?
I had heard.
So it takes place in the Second Age, and it takes place during the Second Age. Galadriel is young. Celebrimbor, I believe, is a character in it. Like all the Rings of Power, I believe, are forged during this. So like we get to see that stuff happening. The trailer is epic. Oh my god, it is beyond epic. Like you watch this and you're like, I don't know. It's like it brings all of the original feels back of the Lord of the Rings movies when you first saw these trailers. It's just amazing. Oh gosh, it was so mind blowing to watch. I've watched it so many times now. I'm like, I can't stop watching this. Not quite as mind blowing as I was watching the Kenobi trailer. Because okay, so like I'm kind of at like a trifecta of things that are happening right now. Like the Kenobi trailer. And by the way, like the world, I'll open this up with the world is hard right now in so many ways for so many people, and on a spectrum of hard. And this has been kind of a nice escape to also have this. The Lord of the Rings, the Kenobi trailer, but then just because we talked about this last week in Star Trek Strange New Worlds also had a trailer that dropped, and I know that it got masked by everything going on with the Obi-Wan trailer. Oh, Jeff, it is. I wonder if there's anybody that is watching right now. Maybe Rich, check this out. He's already here, Mike. Rich is already here with us.
Strange New. Okay, so on Star Trek Discovery, they had this sequence where they had a season where Captain Pike, who was an original captain from the original series, came on the show. And Captain Pike's just like really interesting character. He's got a horse named Tango. I don't know why I like that, but I'm just throwing that out there. And but he's like a really interesting character. He's kind of cerebral, and so they're doing a show. And it's the kind of like Captain Pike when Captain Pike was the captain of the Enterprise before Captain Kirk, and there's a young Spock, and it's the original pilot actually of Star Trek from like 1965, 1964, and it was at the time seen as too much because they had a female first officer. And people are like, oh, I don't know if America's going to be able to handle that. And they had like, it was a really cerebral show. The episode is called The Cage because it's about the kind of the prisons that we build for ourselves. And it's like, wow, like it was like Twilight Zone-esque. And they basically were like, no, you got to get rid of this. You gotta get rid of this show and bring in Shatner and you know, have him gallivanting with you know, all across the galaxy, and you know, make it more of an adventure. So they're doing this show called Strange New Worlds, and so yeah, there's just this like great time. If you're a lover of like science fiction, it's great because there's all this really cool stuff that's happening. It's a great distraction is more than anything.
Well, I love that in the last, you know, post Game of Thrones, that we're starting to finally, you know, I did enjoy Game of Thrones for what it was. I've never read the books. I've tried listening. I bought one book, got like 3 pages, and I'm like, I can't do this. And then I came back like 6 months later and I bought an audiobook of it and got like 20 minutes in. I'm like, I can't do this. Like it's just so dialogue heavy. I'm like, it's not my kind of story. But the TV show I had enjoyed. For what it was, I enjoyed it. But I have to say that like that almost like reopened the door for fantasy and sci-fi shows to like get almost a fresh rebirth. So like seeing the Lord of the Rings show that's been in development for years now. I mean, billions of dollars have been put into this show, and the trailer shows you just how epic that's going to be. We have that, all these new Star Wars things coming out, to see Star Trek out there. I mean, Wheel of Time. I've never read the Wheel of Time books before, but after watching that first season, I'm like, I need to read these books. Like this, I've heard about it for years. I'm like, this is amazing. Actually, watching The Witcher on Netflix got me to buy the book. So I'm like 3 books into the Witcher series because like this is great. Like this is just awesome fantasy. Like in some cases, like high fantasy that I love to get lost in those worlds so much.
Yeah, I'm right there. Joanna, I have to ask you, like, of all of this, you know, we're talking a lot about these things, and a lot of them are based on literature. I'm trying to go back right now, and I'm actually reading The Lord of the Rings right now. I'm in Shadows in the Dark. I'm in the 2nd chapter of the Fellowship of the Ring right now, and it's been a long time since I've read it. Are any of these books in your kind of history that you've read? Like I'm going to try to hit Dune this summer. I'm going to go back and reread Dune.
Well, yes. I mean, the movies are more in my history than the books. I read the books in high school, and then you know, when the movies came out, I put on a cloak and I made limbus wafers for opening night.
Sorry, by the way, I'll post this for y'all. I actually found someone on TikTok recently who was like, "Hey, if you want to learn how to like make limbus bread, I'll show you." And I made it, and it's amazing. I have some still frozen in my deep freezer outside.
Yeah, so I made biscochitos. I was living in New Mexico, and biscochitos I figured are like
sorry.
And so I'm like,
Joanna, that like speaks to my heart because I had to be convinced by my family to not come on this show in full character. Like I was like Lord of the Rings is one of those...
our show, the Kessel Chat, because I've got my Jedi costume. We can just cosplay this every time, dude. This will not be 100.
I was gonna do the cloak, and I was like, I know I've got I know I have a leaf of Lorien somewhere. It was. Yes. I love the design aesthetic of that movie, and I don't know if it was just because of like when those movies came out and like where I was in my life, but man, I mean those. Oh gosh, that was just.
I still remember like the crumbs on the tables in like the sets were just so lovingly put together.
Okay,
with those movies.
Let's just get into the show. We're ready. I think we're ready to do this. Let's get into the show. I'm gonna switch this over real quick and then we'll get started. All right, we have to.
We weren't in it.
hold on. Sorry. I failed. Joanna, I'm sorry. Hold on. There you are. Okay, you're back. Okay. Whew. I reordered the scenes. Sorry. No, we'll do it a quick intro. Like, everybody, thank you for joining us. It's awesome to be here. Rich, it is excellent to see you, my friend. We are doing, as you can see up above there, Lord of the Rings versus Star Wars. And Joanna is back with us. Woo! Which is awesome. Hold on. I have a sound effect for you. There we go. Just for you, Joanna. No, it's awesome to have you back. And it's, as we did the last time when we did the Star Trek versus Star Wars, for everybody who was watching last time, Rich was here as well. This is not really a versus. We did that because it's a nice spicy title to get people to like want to come watch the show. But this isn't a versus because you can't. We can compare and talk about the differences and the distinctions. But at the end of the day, this is about how awesome both of these are and what makes it, where their similarities are, where they differ, but why those similarities and differences are so excellent between the two, and why it's so much fun to be a fan of both. How one draws on the other, things like that. So it's going to be an exciting show. We're super stoked. And Rich, thank you for being here. Do you want to say, what do you say? By the way, don't worry, Ryan loves to mention Star Wars and loves me throwing shade at him. Yes, that is all true.
Yes, I do. I'm always. By the way, Rich called out in the comics. He bloody well knew I did know Rich was on, and that's why I said that. I see the correction there too. But yeah, Joanna, we're super excited to have you on, especially because it's Lord of the Rings. Especially because of your background in mythology. But I feel like we should start at where we were just talking and kind of like the pre-show lead up, which is, I think we all probably came into the Lord of the Rings movies. Maybe we just start there. Like what that time was like, what our memories were of that. Because I feel like, and I'm not going to try to be blasphemous in this and say that, I've heard people say there's only one trilogy, and which is, the original trilogy. But man, or as they said on Clerks, there's only one return, and it's of the Jedi and not the King. But I think it might be a great place to start, like where we all were, like what that movie series meant to us when that came out.
Joanna, you definitely go first. You're the guest,
yeah,
so please go first.
So I mean, thinking back, like I don't remember what year it was. I'm sure you know. What year was it? Must have been 2000.
The first one came out, I think, in 2000. Was it 2000?
Yeah, it was 1999. It was the winter of 1999 into 2000, and so it was this like really, or 2000 into 2001, I believe. That's what it was. It was the winter into 2000 into 2001.
And so that followed 99, which was an epic movie year too. 99 was The Matrix and Galaxy Quest and Fight Club and just like movie after movie that you're like, what just happened? Right? I remember like the Matrix, when I saw The Matrix in the theater the first time, the show ended and I didn't dare move. I was like, is it possible that movie is as good as I think it was? Like, I didn't trust how much I loved it. but fast forward to the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring. It was winter. It was Christmas time. It came out at Christmas, right? And it was like right before Christmas. And I just remember the like enlivening feeling of like we said, like I put on the cloak. I have this gorgeous black cloak that I made for the purpose of being ready when an adventure comes along, right? I made it like right when I graduated high school, and I still have it. And I made the Lembas wafers and I took them with me to the theater, and I was super excited because the preview looked amazing, right? And then the reality of it, going beyond the preview, like so many times the preview is like the best parts of the movie, and you go to the movie and you're like, yeah, thanks. But the movie was so much more than the preview, and just the lushness of the imagination that Peter Jackson brought. I just feel like he woke up all of our imaginations in ways we didn't know we were asleep. Right. And I remember after the Fellowship, I sat there thinking, a year? I have to wait a year for Two Towers? I mean, what's going on here? How can I possibly?
I can remember finishing the movie in the theater, and every single time it finishes and they go their separate ways, going, maybe if I just watch this again, something different will happen. I'll get a little bit more the next time. Like, it can't possibly wait till next Christmas. Like, there's got to be more there. I'll just watch it again, and it'll just end a little bit differently next time, and I'll feel better about this.
I remember that feeling too. And by the way, like, I also share Joanna, coming out in 1999 was like insane. I remember how there was just so much great movies that came out. I remember actually because The Matrix came out in March of 1999, so that was ahead of Episode 1 for Star Wars, and I was like so taken aback by The Matrix, and I've talked to people who were out of the country when The Matrix was going on and trying to explain like what that was like. It was like the commercials were, by the way, Jeff, we could do a Matrix. We could do a whole Matrix thing. The Matrix came out in March, and the tagline was, "No one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself." And it was the first time I remember seeing a website with a movie, which was whatisthematrix.com. And it was like, what is this? Like, what is this going to be? And I remember when his spoilers for The Matrix, when the whole Agent Smith says, how, what are you going to say if you can't speak? And then his mouth kind of comes together, and it was just like, oh my gosh, what is happening right now? This is crazy. And so then it like kicked off also like production that started to happen, because The Matrix was so big and it was made for so cheaply in Australia, that I remember then suddenly hearing how all these movies were made in Australia, and then with
New Zealand.
Lord of the Rings.
Sorry, just a correction. New Zealand. They were filmed in New Zealand.
Oh no! I'm 100%.
Oh, okay.
Because I am going to go to New Zealand and go on the one day I will end up in Hobbiton and go and check that out. But what I mean by that is that it also opened up all of these actors that were in either in Australia or a big part of Australia or New Zealand movie industry, and one of them is Hugo Weaving. Who plays, of course, in The Matrix, but he's Elrond, half elven in Lord of the Rings, and I remember sitting down, and I didn't have any expectations, and I just from when it opens up with Cate Blanchett's talking to when it closes with, I think it's an Enya song, I was like, I felt like I'd seen like a perfect movie, and it wasn't even done. Like I was so moved at the end of that movie. Oh my gosh, yeah, it was an experience to see that.
The scores in those movies. I mean, they just tug at all of your feels. They just did such a great job with composition. In The Fellowship, when Frodo and Sam are traveling, before they even meet up with Merry and Pippin, they're still kind of traveling, and they're walking down a road, and there are a group of, I think they're Sindarin elves, kind of walking towards the Grey Havens, or I think they're on their way to a celebration. But the music that's playing and they're singing, it's like it's beautiful and like sad all the same. Like, I think Sam actually says, I feel really sad, and I'm not sure why. And it's like, and he says this, and you're like, oh God! Like, every time I watch that, like, just tugs at my heart. I'm like, the amount, how well they dealt with the sound effects and the music. It was just that alone. We've talked about this before, Ryan. Like, in movies in general and in TV shows, the score and the sound effects are almost, the music especially, is almost its own character, or is its own separate thing that is happening in addition to the show. And in The Lord of the Rings, it's 100% that. 100% its own separate like movie that's happening at the same time as the acting.
Yes. Well, and I think that gets to like that, the music being sad and beautiful. I think that gets to part of the power of those movies and what Peter Jackson did, the kind of that simultaneity, right? Mm-hmm. Like the Nazgul have this beauty along with their horror and their terror, and the good guys have the crumbs on the table. Like every like extreme is tempered by a little bit of its opposite, right? And simultaneity is just so rich and so so nourishing, I think. I mean, and so fun. It's so, and you can't, like Ryan says, it's like you just feel like it's complete, it's whole. There's this perfectness to it.
There really
I think
is.
I think in part because of how it's able to hold the complexity.
I wanted to share with you both, like, as we're talking about how we kind of got to the movies, or like in our own lives, how that kind of came about for us. I remember being a freshman in high school, and people had said to me, something people had said to me before. Oh, the Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings. They had mentioned this phrase, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what that is. And then like, oh, aren't you reading that in your English class in high school? I'm like, because we were in the same high school. I'm like, no, like I'm reading whatever these books are. Like, oh, I guess that's just some of the teachers had this book, and some of the teachers made you read like Grapes of Wrath or something. And I'm like, okay, some book called Lord of the Rings. I don't know. That doesn't sound very interesting to me. I don't know what that means. And finally, I think it was like junior year. So this would have been, was that 96? Yeah, 96. I said this to my dad like start of the junior year. I'm like, what the heck is Lord of the Rings? He's like, and he kind of tries to explain it to me. He goes, I'll get you something and let you know about it. Let you know what it is. We can talk about it later. And then I completely forgot. And then for Christmas morning, I wake up, and it wasn't this copy. It was a different copy, but this is the one I still have. It was the copy of The Hobbit. And I'm like, okay, what's a Hobbit? And he goes, well, you remember you asked me about Lord of the Rings? I'm like, yes. He's like, well, this is kind of the thing that happens before that. I'm like, so you didn't get me actual book I've been asking you about. You got me a different book. I was like totally confused. And so I put it aside for like 3 or 4 days. I'm like, thanks, Dad. Cool. But it was like, typical like 17-year-old. I'm like, all right, thanks. And then finally one day he's like, did you open it yet? He's like, just try reading it. It was like one night at like 6 o'clock. We finished dinner. I'm like, okay, I'll go read it. I'm fairly certain I didn't go to bed till 4 a.m. because I could not stop reading The Hobbit. And as soon as I got home from school the next day, I went into my room and I stayed up until like 3 a.m. and I finished it. And I was like, what the hell is this book? And then I went to my dad and said, so what is Lord of the Rings? He goes, it's the series of books that happens after that. So I went straight to the library and checked out all 3 books and read them in the rest of the week. And I was like, I remember it blowing my mind. And then of course, like a year or so later, or 6 months later, I hear that I see a trailer for a movie. I'm like, wait, this is and it was like just mind explosion after mind explosion over the course of like 6 months, and go to see the movie. So like there wasn't even a huge stretch for me of time between coming into it and actually seeing it on screen. And I was just like, I am hooked. I'm so hooked.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Joanna, please.
No, I was just saying, it reminds me of like the containing story of the framing story of The Princess Bride. The grandfather. Oh, yes. Getting the grandson to read S. Morgenstern's book.
I always loved hearing stories of people that kind of started with The Hobbit. I know a number of people who had their parents read them The Hobbit when they were kids. It's a thing that like, oh, didn't your parents read that to you growing up? And I was like, no. It's funny because Tolkien is a contemporary and a good friend of C.S. Lewis. And I knew all of the C.S. Lewis books, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, The Magician's Nephew, Prince all Caspian, of those things. The Magic Chair, or no? Oh yeah, like Horse and His Boy, like all that stuff.
I've never actually, I've never actually read those books. I've always meant to, but I've just never done it. I don't know why. Did you know that? Actually, sorry, not to cut you up, but did you know that in you've probably watched the extended editions, but how they begin in usually the extended edition versions of the movies afterwards, there's in the box set, you have them behind you there, the 2 additional DVDs that have like in each box there's 2 additional DVDs per movie. Oh yeah, have like 6 or 8 hours of additional video content about how they made that movie. And usually the first like hour or 2 of it is just interviewing people who are authors or Tolkien scholars, or Alan Lee and what's his name, Alan Lee, and what was the other John Noble? No, the 2 main artists.
John Knowles.
No. The 2 main artists. Who are the 2 main artists? Most notable, it's Alan Lee, and Alan Lee is the kind of the recluse, and then there's the other dude who's like into swords, long black hair.
John Howe.
Thank you, John Howe.
I have it right here.
Yes,
Jeff. I've got it. Right.
Thank you. I knew you'd have it. In it, they talk about one of the like Tolkien biographers talks about how much C.S. Lewis and him were good friends, and when Tolkien would go to visit C.S. Lewis while he was giving a lecture at Oxford. He would walk down the hall when he would walk down the hallway. He's like recorded something. Tolkien has actually said this, of hearing him, and his voice would boom down the hallway like, like that's how he perceived C.S. Lewis when he'd come down the hallway, and it's actually what inspired the voices, how they did the voice of Treebeard in the movie, that deep, barrowing, booming sort of voice they did for what's his name? I'm blanking on the actor's name who played Treebeard.
John Rhys
Davies. John Rhys Davies.
So they also Gimli. Gimli.
Yep. So the way they formatted his voice was specifically to channel C.S. Lewis in Treebeard. And that was that was their ode to C.S. Lewis and the friendship of Tolkien and him in the movies, was the voice of Treebeard, because that's exactly how Tolkien remembered him sounding when he would lecture. I always thought that was I always thought those little things that that Philippa Boyens and Fran, Peter's wife, as the two main writers, that they did. It's like all those little subtleties they put into the writing in the movies, that even those times where I had people like, they cut this part out, or why did they take that out of the book? And like, when you hear Philippa talk about it in the behind the scenes about why they did it, it was, everyone was extremely intentional. And even still, they still did nods to that thing in some other way in the stories. You just have to kind of pay attention for it.
Yeah. I just really liked. I like how a lot of people come with their own kind of special history. I hadn't read any of these books until I was in high school, and one of the things that I find really interesting, and a common parallel with Star Wars, is one, you have two creators that then make this one thing and then spend the rest of their lives iterating on it and like building the worlds of it. You have Tolkien, who just like writes The Hobbit and then, write a sequel to that. And he's like, yes, I've written The Lord of the Rings. And by the way, the last part of it is just appendices on the kings of Arnor and Gondor, the fall of Numenor, all these other things. And then likewise, you have someone like George Lucas, who's like, I've this is one of my movies, but then continues to keep iterating on what that world is. But what I'm a big fan of the academic study of religion. I think the Bible is a really interesting literary work. If you read it, if you don't have to be of a particular faith, I always think that it's great to read the books of faith of any faith as a literary work. Just take it in. And Tolkien is a devout Catholic. C.S. Lewis is an atheist when he's writing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which itself has all of these like religious connections. I mean, Aslan, spoilers for an 80-year-old book, Aslan comes back to life after being sacrificed.
Sorry.
Hilarious. The thing that's funny about this is that Lord of the Rings has a lot of really amazing connections back to religion. I don't think it's on accident that even in some of the ways that Aragorn is portrayed, he's very Christ-like in his portrayals. It's a very and I mean like that from an imagery standpoint, like even in the coronation scene, like what that looks like. But I like the academic evaluation of religion, and Tolkien even writes his own religion, his own creation myth inside of the Lord of the Rings. And Jeff, you were talking about the singing when the elves are leaving, and this is to Howard Shore's credit, who's the composer of these movies. What's it? Iluvatar?
The songs of Iluvatar.
That the world is sung into being, and
the entire universe is sung into being. Yes, and that Melkor
who is the the Luciferian type person in this story, Melkor, who becomes Morgoth, who begets Sauron. That in all of these things, it's connected to a song. And the songs are harmonious or discord, and that's how these deities create. And I love how when they're talking about the ancient past or the things of this old thing, or as Galadriel says, history becomes legend, legend becomes myth. Those things are done. There's a song in the background. The Ring has a voiced chorus. All of these things that were maybe more pure because they were from like a time before, like a time of the song, they always have a voice chorus, and I love that little touch in the movies.
And that's an example of how the art form of cinema can just really serve the original. It isn't a copy paste.
Yeah. I love that. Something, Joanna, something you mentioned a little bit ago. You kind of mentioned the pre-show and then said it again. The crumbs on the table. I believe you were referring to something very specific, like an actual thing that is in the movie. And something that's interesting to me about how you describe that is, and I don't want to draw a comparison here to Star Trek because I don't want to put any sort of thing down. But what I'm realizing is that something I love about, and I'm just realizing this as we're talking about it, is that between Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, we'll just, for the sake of this conversation, let's stick with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the original one back in the early 2000s. Let's leave the Hobbit movies out because that's a whole problematic frustration.
We'll leave those over here.
We're gonna have to get to another time because
big fan of Martin Freeman, though. Big fan of Martin Freeman.
I love Martin Freeman really think, all day long.
Yeah,
but
I think a lot of those actors really tried their best.
Those movies were like this big bucket. If you put a lot of suck, you know what? Never mind. We're just gonna stop right there because it's not gonna help anything. Anyway, something I was just thinking about between Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, and based off of what you said, Joanna, is when you look at, the simplest place. You look at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring when we see Bilbo again, or Bilbo as an old man, and he's in his hobbit hole. Every detail about that space, every single detail, like scraps on the floor, like there is no space that is wasted in conveying who this person is that we're just now meeting, the music that is playing, and you instantly feel like, just looking at the set, you know who this character is. And then if you look at any of the Star Wars properties, and I think a really good example of this here for me is actually Rogue One. So if you watch Star Wars Rogue One, and near the beginning of it, when we first meet the character Cassian Andor, who's like one of the main two characters of the movie, he's on a planet, he's a spy, he's on a planet meeting a contact, and they're having an encounter. But if you look around that planet, like even stop frame for a moment as he's walking down a street, you just pause it. You notice that there's air cars flying above, but not just one. There's like multiple layers in traffic. There's mist. There's steam coming out of pipe and vents. There's pipes on every wall. Like there's no space that is left unused in the set to make you feel like you are in that place, and that the person in front of you, it gives you a sense of exactly the type of character he is beyond what the actor is actually doing. It gives you a sense of who is this person, what are they thinking, what's their mind. Like we're learning about this character before he even opens his mouth. Like he's on set, and I really love how these directors and producers between the Lord of the Rings and even like Star Wars, how well that is done. Like so well. Nothing even needs to be said in a moment. And you're like, no, I know exactly what's going on. I feel like I'm in that room with this person, and I can almost guess, probably in like an emotional way, how they're going to behave next, how that character is going to start interacting with everybody else on the screen.
It's very lived in, the sets. It looks, I know that was by design. They had like a 2-year pre-production schedule, and that's why that Hobbiton set looks like it does. Like there's weeds growing. It's not an antiseptic. It's not like and here's the set. You know what I mean? It's like, man, it looks like Bilbo's been living. Ian Holm has been living in that set for years.
The amount of time they took to do. For example, Edoras, when they build the Rohirrims, or in Rohan, they build the mountain structure, the hilltop structure of Edoras, their capital city. In New Zealand, where they found that hill, is a random hill in a valley they had to fly like 2 hours into on a helicopter to locate. Super high winds that fly over it. So like it was very difficult to get vehicles out there. They were not allowed to pave roads to get them out there, so they had to get their trucks. And more importantly, the only way they were permitted to even build on that hill is every single bit of wildlife that they had to take off the hill to build a set had to be put back in exactly the place that was in. They're like, you want to use it? Here's how you get. I'm not joking. Like, here's how you get to use it. And they literally built like 3 football field sized greenhouses down on the valley floor. That every single piece of ground that was cut out was meticulously cut out and tracked and tagged and driven down to a greenhouse and kept intact to be driven back up when they tore all the sets back down again. So
what scene was that?
So in the Two Towers. Yeah, when we first meet the Rohirrim, so Aragorn and Gimli, they're all on horses, and they're riding through the valley, and they get through a valley, and you see Edoras. You see Edoras in the background, and the golden what do they call it? What is the term for the golden house of the king? As they're riding to Edoras, the hill that is on, it's literally a hill in this big valley in New Zealand. That hill. Every piece of set that they built on top of that, they had to cut the ground out. Every piece of ground was taken down to a greenhouse and then physically replaced in exactly the place that it came out of. They hired like a horticulturalist and his team of people to care for those things through the entire time period that they were prepping for, filming, and breaking down that's the level of like detail they put into making sure that what was there felt like a real place that people lived in. And they did. I think actually on set, like people could actually go sleep and they had bunks and things like that in the different buildings while they were filming that so that they could just use that space for its own purpose. Since the actors or the filming never went into the outbuildings other than the main hall, no one went into the outbuildings. They used that all for practical space.
Well, and that's so awesome because it's so in tune. Well, going back to the music as character, it's so in tune with the spirit of the movies, which really, it's Middle Earth, right? But the operative noun there is Earth. They're like these movies and the story are in love with this Earth, which is a distinction between the Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, right? In Star Wars, planets are a dime a dozen. In the Lord of the Rings, it is this Earth that is beautiful and that sings and that is under threat and is being damaged by the malevolent deity. I'll say, Ryan, going back to your point, your very taken point that we're looking at religious imagery here.
100%, yes.
And so it was all like the beauty of the Shire, right? The growing things, the flowers, and yes, I love that in making the movie, they had to be true to an ethos like that.
I really do. Oh, sorry, Ryan. I was gonna say I really do love the and it actually. So for anybody watching, to kind of help Joanna prep a little bit for tonight, or like just give her some prep, and actually just because it's fun to watch, I asked her to watch the Star Wars Mortis arc from, I think it's Star Wars the Clone Wars season 3 episodes. I think it's 15, 16, 17 or 16, 17, 18. I don't remember exactly which numbers they were. I had to look it up to make sure to send to her. But in that, it's such a well wrapped, like packaged, self-contained story in just a couple of in 3 episodes. But it also does really play out. It lets you understand in Star Wars like this rich history of the Force, not Jedi, not Sith, not all that, but this. Not even I don't even want to say religion. Like it is a thing that exists. And these beings that you meet are luminous beings that are literally, for all intents and purposes, let's call them deities. Many people call them gods in the Star Wars writings, but they are deities. They are literally physically and their being is just connected to the living force and the cosmic force as well. And it's so interesting to watch those episodes because then you come back to Lord of the Rings, and we see the physical manifestation of deities like that in the movie, in the movies as we played. Like it's all centered around a deity they're trying to go take down and finish. Even the elves, Galadriel herself is almost a deity in her own right, because she's one of the oldest in all of Middle Earth, probably one of the most powerful in all of Middle Earth, but hers is waning. Her power is starting to wane at that point. Even the music of not Rivendell, why am I blanking on where she lives?
Lothlorien.
Lothlorien, that's right, Lothlorien. Even where she lives, the music there is beautiful, but it's somber. It's not Whereas even Rivendell feels like it's almost like perked up a little bit, the music there, and it's beautiful and there's sunlight and all that. And even Lothlorien feels like everything is kind of somber and subdued a little bit.
Yeah, I love the concept of there's a thing that I like in Lord of the Rings, which also is a big part of Star Wars, which is the passage of time, and and how big events cause brand new eras. That the bringing down the time of the time of the trees, the fight with Morgoth, all these things happen in this more ancient time of the first age. You know, Morgoth is defeated and the second age begins. And now we have the Numenorians and a reshaped Middle Earth, like all of these cities, all of these things are gone. All of this great history, these thousands of years, like Gondolin, they're all been buried by the sea. The world has even been changed from a flat world to a round world, you know? And then there's the second age. And I like these things because in Star Wars, there's always these big events that happen. And they even like call them that. They're like the High Republic, the waning years of the Republic, the time of the Empire, the time of the New Republic, or time of rebellion, as I think they call it sometimes, and then also the First Order. And one of the things that I find that is really interesting, which is a thing we talked about last week, is that both of those eras are usually tied to a thing, which is that there is often a threat that is rising that needs to be dealt with, but that often the characters in those stories, Tolkien says that men, and I believe he means humankind, gets bored with peace, and that's a problem. That's actually the impetus of so many wrongs, is that we get bored with peace. And you see that with the passage of the High Republic into to the Republic to the Empire. You see that from the Empire to the New Republic, and not that the Empire obviously had to fail and be overthrown, but again, it's that we get bored with peace. And we look for those problems. The Numenor, like Atlantis, fails. They fall because they spend, over 1,000 years in peace, and they lose their way. It's just a really interesting concept that I think is replicated in a lot of stories.
I absolutely. Sorry, go, John. I haven't thought about Numenor specifically.
There's two things I want to lift up. One is this wonderful book called A Terrible Love of War, or it might be The Terrible Love of War. I can't remember which one it is. It's by an archetypal psychologist named James Hillman, and it will change the way you think about war, and it's amazing. And it goes right to that idea that we get bored with peace. There is this something magnetic and something that like almost draws civilizations and people into conflict. And the second thing is at the beginning of the show, Ryan mentioned that, there's so much going on in the news. It's nice to escape into these stories. I would suggest that these stories help directly, and they directly address situations like what we are seeing now. These are extreme stories. In the last time we saw something like what we're seeing now, it seems to me like on this scale that we're seeing was Hitler, right?
Yes.
And Hitler was and remains kind of like the example of evil. Like people talk about,
Yes.
Oh, there's no such thing as evil except Hitler, right? he's the one that like breaks the rule that there's no such thing as evil. Well, guess what? We're seeing it again. And these stories that deal with big problems, like things that you might call evil, I think that they help us handle the situation when it shows up in the real world. That's the power of exaggeration, is it prepares you psychologically to say, oh, we've seen this before. and the lessons, I'll say, from these stories serve as psychological preparation for confronting what's happening in reality. And I'll stop there. I feel like we could do a whole episode just on that, but
I just have one really quick thing to say about that, because I feel like, yes, and I often look to those stories in times that are like this. By the way, I think they're all products of their time, and we talked about this last time. Even though, again, many of the artists, even George Lucas, will reject. Look, I'm telling you, Episode 2 has nothing to do with the War on Terror, or Episode 3, and it's like, I don't know about that, man. Like, I really feel like you are definitely influenced by, as artists often are. But even more than that, it's 100% okay for audiences, when an artist is done and delivers their work, for an audience to see things that maybe the artist didn't intend but unconsciously added into their story, like with Lord of the Rings and World War One. And so I look to those stories, and again, being products of their time, as those lessons, as those things where it's like how the struggle to fight for peace allows us not to live in war. That we have to the work that needs to go into preserving the peace. I think a lot about the story that Gandalf tells Pippin about what the afterlife is like, about what death is like, and he says that this world beyond this gray rain curtain, that then there you see it.
Far green fields unto a swift sunrise, I believe.
Onto a swift sunrise, and
it's beautiful.
And that is a great vision for the afterlife. This wonderful air, this wonderful green, beautiful world, and at the same time, that's the Shire. That's the thing that we have on Earth right now, or in that Middle Earth we have right now. And so there is, while yes, there is that thing behind the gray rain curtain, there is the thing that we can fight for now. There is paradise on Earth that we could make now.
It's almost
yeah.
What you're describing.
And I think the operative word there is now, right?
Yes.
Because even and maybe especially in the face of great challenge and great terror and great enemies, the now is always accessible, and the now is where that flowering can happen. The now is where eternity happens. And heaven is an image of eternity. Heaven is a literalization of something that exists outside of space and time as we go through it most of the time, and it is always now, and it is always available.
Yes,
right. And as you said that, and I appreciate what you just said too, Joanna, because as you were saying, and speaking of this idea that consuming an artist's content, whether it's writing, a literary work like Lord of the Rings, poetry, a movie, whatever it happens to be, that you catch something the artist may not have intended. And something you just, actually both of you just said, made me think that not only is Gandalf kind of getting him to think like, I'm describing this beautiful place to you, but you have something like that here now too. I think almost what he was doing is, and he was giving an allusion to, if you think of that, like he wasn't telling Pippin this, but I'm pulling the veil back for you to show you in a different light the Shire. You're here now, and now you have to look back at, I have pulled back the gray curtain, and I am showing you, after I've described it, I've broken you down completely. I've broken everything down. You're sitting here in Gondor, about to be attacked by all these armies, and now I'm going to pull back this gray curtain and show you. Now take a look at the Shire. And you're like, oh, I see it now. Mm-hmm. Like I didn't see it before because I was in it, and now I can get it. And it's interesting to think about it in those. Like, there's so many different ways you can think about the relevance of like it's Arda is the name of the planet. What is the name for the world? What is the they refer to it as the Undying Lands, but it has an actual it has an actual name, and I forget what, I'm blanking on what the name of it would be, but something that's no longer in the light of the trees, but it's in the light of whatever it's in, because the trees were torn down by Melkor and then the Silmarils and all those things. But it's interesting to think about each of these pieces almost are the same as each other. How Gandalf describes the Undying Lands and what it's like. and the other descriptions we have in the other books, in books like the Book of Lost Tales, where like all kinds of other stories of Beren and Luthien and things like that. All these examples and where they talk about where they came from, these other places, are all basically describing the same thing. They're describing the same set of emotional feelings these characters have for this other thing that they're now realizing how important it actually was to them, but they never realized it in the moment. And it's not a place. They refer to places in these stories, but that's not what's really meant. What's really meant is a thing that you have that you've walked away from for some reason because you didn't realize what you really had. And now that you're in a turmoil in this different place, you can look back with a different perspective and realize that's actually what I really wanted. Why am I over here? That's what I really wanted. How do I get back to that? How do I... And it's a metaphysical thing. It's an emotional thing. It's not I want to go live back at my, the house I grew up in. It's, I want to be somewhere. How do I get back to this feeling that I used to have that I don't have now? This childlike sense of imagination, whatever that my 6-year-old has. How do I get back to that? I love how it's all these things are still conveying that same core story, that core thing for humans that we need to always sort of be reminded of.
That authenticity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the question is, what is the gray curtain? Like that's such a great image. Pull back the gray curtain. Okay, so what's the gray curtain an image of? Right? Your fears, your doubts, your distractions, your habits, whatever it might be. Like pull that back, and then you have access to that, that birthright magic that you are.
Oh yeah, I think about this a lot because I mean honestly, again, like I love the study of religion because again you can see this in the intersections with the Force. The Jedi will talk about how when you die, like don't worry, don't be sad about that person. They're in the Force now. Like they're one with the Force. Miss them, as Yoda would say, miss them, do not mourn them, do not. They're with the Force, and likewise, there's the Undying Lands that Frodo is sailing off to, or that the elves are leaving Middle Earth for. They're leaving for the Undying Land. What is it, Valinor?
Valinor.
And
yes.
Our own modern religions. There's the afterlife. Our reward is that your reward is there. And I've always thought about that scene, and even in the book when Gandalf is talking about that and what it is to sail into the West. And I feel like for a writer who's also Tolkien and what it meant to go into the West, which was the new frontier, which was to the old world, if I could be so bold to say that, this vast new world that's open, that's I've always stuck there and thought, I mean, isn't that the Shire already? And of course, at the end of the book of Return of the King, there's the scouring of the Shire, and the hobbits have to fight to get their homeland back. And they realize, as Samwise says, that there's something worth fighting for. And that's the thing that I always thought was a really interesting balance, which is to try to explain that the promises that are associated with eternity, whether they're in our religions or in the Undying Lands or becoming one with the Force, that there is value to what we have here. That what is out there is different, and that is there's definitely surrendering to the Force, as you might call it, is this like really amazing thing, and this new plane of existence. But I feel like the other side of it is always, but there is so much value here. Our concepts of paradise are built around what this is like. And so I'm sorry if I'm like kind of moving into more of a metaphysical or an analysis side, but I really love this as a concept, which is that's why, Luke can't just be like, you know what, I'm gonna just crash my ship into the Death Star and just become one with the Force.
Peace.
No, he's got to make the universe a better place for him and others. Pippin's got to fight the orc that's gonna come through that gate for him and everyone in the Shire. And likewise, we have to do what we can in this life for ourselves and others, because there's a paradise to fight for on Earth. And I like that as a concept.
It's so very as we were talking about this, these are all coming together. It's so very Scandinavian or Viking. I like you can't, at the end of this struggle that you live and you did it well, you get to go to Valhalla and fight all day and then sit at Odin's table and feast with Odin and all the other warriors, and then do it all over again the next day. And it's
and notice the fighting there in that image. The fighting is the reward, which goes back to this.
It's exactly what it is. Yes.
And it goes to the Bhagavad Gita as well. Mm-hmm. Krishna and Arjuna saying, I don't know about fighting. And Krishna's like, yeah, this is what it's all about. You go. Mm-hmm. This is the field of, this is the play of time and space. Jump in. And Star Wars, the word war is like in the name of the whole franchise. Right? That's even the episodes, Jeff, that you shared with me, there was, I don't remember which episode it was, but at one point they're like the like soldiers are like eager, they're chomping at the bit to get into the fight, and they want to join the fun, is what it says, right? And so that this aspect is something, I mean, and it's also true that war is terrible. Yes. War is hell, and it's horrible, and all of that exists alongside of, kind of this pull toward it, the joy of it, and this metaphysical dimension to it all.
It is beautiful. I was thinking, as you were saying that, Joanna, I was thinking the elves and everybody else in Middle Earth wanting to get to the Undying Lands when they've completed their time on Middle Earth. Beleriand formerly, and then Middle Earth after the war. I think it was the Battle of a Number of Tears. And once it's same thing for, we noticed in Star Wars with the Jedi as well. Like they want to, you hit it on the head. They want, the want is the struggle, to complete the struggle so that there's a meaning when you are finally not here anymore, so that when you become part of the cosmic force, or you go to Valhalla, or you go to Valinor, what you're going to is a way to acknowledge that I was here and I performed the struggle. I performed the good fight. I did the good fight. I performed the struggle. I did the thing, so that when I'm leaving, the reward is knowing that I did what I was supposed to be doing here. I completed the purpose that I had, and this is my reward for completing that purpose. For the Vikings, it would be battling all day long, dying and killing each other. But it's not for them. It's not about the killing. That's not the point. It's the battling. It's the good work of battling. In Star Wars, it's I lived good and I did the right thing by the Force and by other people, and I get to become part of the cosmic force. And then, et cetera, for all these different other belief systems as well. It's a beautiful, it's a really beautiful circle that it creates. We see it through all of them.
Yeah, and this is a part of the Lord of the Rings. It's obviously a part of Star Wars, and we can go in, by the way, of like how Gandalf and Obi-Wan are very much the same character. But
I will say, Gandalf, is he really? You know what though? He is kind of like gaslighting everybody too, because he, in the books especially, because he speaks in freaking riddles all of the time, right, to everybody, and never tells anybody anything ever. Yeah. Really?
Yeah, he only meters out the knowledge when he needs it, when you need it. But the thing, there's a character, all the characters are forced with this, and I mean it's exacerbated in the movies, which is that they have to play their part. You have Aragorn, it's time to leave the Ranger behind. And his story is very much like Narsil becoming Andoril.
Andoril, yes. The Flame of the West.
Flame of the West, exactly, Flame of the West. But there's a character who I've always really liked, and his portrayal in the movies is honestly my favorite character, and it's Theoden. And it's because when we meet Theoden, he is just a broken person. He is experiencing. He says these things. He says something like how terrible it is that he should live to see such times. And oh gosh, I mean, he is just like he is facing defeat in a way where and it's not just the defeat of his people or the destruction of humans, his kingdom, everything that he should see, that he should live to see the end of his line. You know, all of these things, the loss that he experiences of his son, of his kingdom, of all of these things. And then he has to find his courage, the thing that he has to play, his role. It's like how he defers to Aragorn. And by the way, this is exacerbated again in Two Towers, even more so, and in Return of the King, to where he's even ambivalent as to whether or not to uphold the oath of Errol. And again, they really play this up in the movies. And then they get, and then of course, Aragorn leaves to take the path through the mountain to go and get the army of the dead, and his army is like, we're not gonna make it, and he's like, we might not make it, we probably won't, but we will still meet it. And then you get this rise of Theoden, where then he's leading the charge and riding that horse and inspiring and everybody. And I'm sorry, I'll just say this really quickly. But he finds, and it's not in the fight, he finds in himself the thing that he finds himself. Did we lose Joanna?
I think we did.
No!
She'll come back. She'll be back in a minute, I'm sure. We'll keep. It's okay.
So he finds in himself this amazing moment, which is he finds his courage, and he finds his role. And in his last words, he says, "Finally, I go now to my fathers, in whose company I now no longer feel ashamed." And it's like, it's a really interesting view on how he struggled in life to live up to the history of who his family and his line was. And it's in his ability to play a role in this that he is finally able to be comfortable with himself, which is the opposite of Frodo's story, which is he can never heal. Yeah. His wounds will never heal. He has to go to the Undying Lands because he is forever changed. The paradise that he has won, he cannot be a part of. And so the Theoden story has always been one that I found interesting, especially in comparison to Frodo's story, because Frodo gets his life in the end, but he cannot live it. Whereas Theoden feels finally accomplished, whole in the end.
It's so interesting how each character is an image of what Jeff was talking about with that authenticity. Right? Like each character's authenticity feels so authentic and so perfect for them, and so unique to them. And Frodo's story couldn't possibly be Theoden's story, or vice versa. And yes. But the story is big enough, and honestly, I think it's because of the high stakes. The story pushes and pushes and pushes on the characters until it's authenticity or bust. There's no choice.
Yes. Yeah.
The lead up you were just giving there, Ryan, on Theoden specifically, and I'm with you on that one completely, Joanna, that all these characters are playing, whether they realize it or not, they are playing a part that they need to play. And by the end, whether they recognize it or not, they finally get there. They get to a place where they kind of accept, whether they actively acknowledge it or not. And they do. I think Faramir is a really good, like, blatant case of that, where he accepts this is what I'm going to have to do, and I do it. Aragorn does the same, but many of the others are very subtle. They don't recognize that's what's actually happening to them. Theoden's arc is one of my favorite, and especially in the movie, Theoden and the Battle of the Pelennor in the movies, and the ride of the Rohirrim into the line of orcs in front of Gondor is my favorite part in the movies, full stop. The charge when they come up, when they crest the hill and the sun shines behind them, and the music that's playing is a very subdued music. At that moment, you hear all the horses moving, you hear all the lances coming out. He ride for ruin, ride for what is it? Ride for ruin,
ride for ruin, ride for wrath,
and the ride for the world ending.
And the red sun rises, or the something like that. Yeah,
he said, "Oh no!" And the world ending, or something.
No, the world's ending. Yeah.
Poor Theoden, and he gets ready and they ride. And my favorite part about that is the starting to the charge and then the speeding up of the charge. But more specifically in the movie, when they collide, when those war horses, those battle horses collide with the orcs, there's no music. The music stops. All music other than sound effects stops for a couple of seconds. It hits hard because it's no longer just trying to ramp you up. It's letting you know, no, this is really happening right here. And it reinforces what he is leading. Like, they are vastly outnumbered, like 10-1 sort of outnumbered. They're doing it anyway. And he's like, we're going to do this anyway because that's who we are and that's what we have to do here. And I wouldn't say it just works out. It doesn't just work out, but it sets off a chain of events that show the dichotomy of the light and the dark in that particular moment, because as overwhelming are the odds, when the light comes through and is like, we're just going to do this, and the dark doesn't really care, they're just kind of doing their thing. As soon as they break through, everybody starts to scatter. Like, everybody starts to move around. The Sauron's forces just start like becoming disarrayed, and it's almost like showing you the difference between organized structure when you have a purpose and a kind of almost a lack of purpose in the definition of what this evil and good is supposed to be shown in that scene. The evil just is fractured and falls apart almost immediately, even though they're so much, they could have easily wiped them out, like in a heartbeat. It wouldn't even been a problem, but that's not the point. That wasn't the point of what they're trying to convey in this scene. Like, they could not possibly have beaten them, not because they couldn't physically have done it, but that's not the purpose they serve in that moment.
Well, and so is that not what we're seeing in the news? You know, the people with purpose are surprising the world, and the people who are like, yeah, okay, whatever, you know. But it also, that's so interesting about how the music stops at that moment of clash. The music, going back to Ryan's point, the music being creation, right? Creation pauses, destruction takes hold, destruction rises to the fore, and then the cycle is going to begin again. That's how creation myths go. Well, that's how myth goes. Like, first creation, and then existence, and then destruction, and then creation comes again. And you have to have the destruction if you're going to get to creation again. And so I feel like this like pull of war, and this like the thing about war that draws us connects with that somehow, which I'm sure we could talk about a lot.
Oh, yes. I couldn't agree more. I feel like that is, and it's funny how you can get caught up in it. And by the way, like, I'm so easily moved by music, and I feel like the music that's in the Lord of the Rings movies, and by the way, like, I'm a big fan of the Star Wars music, obviously. There is a great moment where the music has a similar shift, although there is still music that's playing. It's when Luke's doing the trench run, and basically it's John Williams' version of The Planet's Mars by Gustav Holst, and it's dun 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 dun, right? And it's like Luke's like, he's like, I gotta do this, and he's in the trench run. It's all of the pressure, and in that moment, all of the sound around Luke goes away. You don't hear the X-Wing anymore. You don't hear anything else. You just see that the camera's moving. You see that you're in Luke's eyes now at this point, and there's nothing else. And all you hear is the Force theme, and it's use the Force, Luke. And then suddenly it's you don't hear anything else. You don't hear the beeps or nothing, like none of the stuff. And I love the use of sound and music in those moments, because it does really like either amplify the experience, or it's another tool for a director to use to be able to say, this is the emotion I'm trying to channel to you right now. And it's the sudden calmness that Luke has in believing in himself, down to I'm turning off my targeting camera, which I always love. There's a guy in the back of that scene that goes, like
someone tells, wait,
whoa,
like, Luke,
did that guy just say
dude,
that?
you turned off the target computer.
Like,
what are you doing?
I'm gonna do this freestyle. Hey man, we're all on the planet hoping you make this shot. So good luck, I guess.
This, man. We're good. I got this.
But I love when that happens. But the music that is the Howard Shore music, there is a really great YouTube video called "How Does Howard Shore Help Us Feel?" And it's basically how that music really helps us feel. And he talks about the Rohirrim theme, which is one of my favorite. There is a longing in that music, I feel like it's actually desperation, and it's amazing how you feel it. And then when it reaches its actual pinnacle, in that charge that you're talking about, Jeff, it is look at these people, they are now no longer desperate, they are taking charge of their destiny. But one of the things that I've always liked is the use of the sounds is even in the theme of the Shire, and how that theme gets lost while Frodo and Sam are getting to Mount Doom. And when Frodo collapses, this happens in Star Wars too, with musical cues like this, which I love. When Frodo's collapsing and he's trying to get to the top of the mountain, he's lost. The Shire theme gets lost, and the flute that plays in the Shire theme is trying to find the theme. Go back and watch this in Return of the King. It is like unbelievable. If there is a moment where you're like, I don't know why I'm weeping, this is the reason why. It's because all of these things, because it's an emotional climax. All of these things are happening, and this theme that should be playing, because Sam is trying to say to Frodo, do you remember strawberries? Do you remember the Shire? And Frodo says, I can't remember the Shire. I can't remember the taste of strawberries. I don't remember home. And so he can't, the theme can't play. And that's when the theme transitions, when Sam picks him up and says, I'll take you, because he's realizing now that there isn't a home that they can go to for them. And so the theme shifts to the theme of Into the West, which is the theme that's played. It's the Annie Lennox song that plays at the end. That's where the theme shifts to, because now Frodo and Sam have to dedicate their lives. They might not make it back to the Shire. It is an amazing piece of music. I'm sorry, by the way, that this episode has become things that we love about the Lord of the Rings. But yeah, it is that is the subtle ways that I feel like it happens in Star Wars very well. It happens in Lord of the Rings amazingly, which is the way that they'll use music, either in the lack of it in sound, or into unknowingly connecting to a theme, like the loss of the Shire theme.
We see it at
and how amazing that is.
Or I would say we hear it a lot at the end of Rogue One, where the two things that are happening, or two different sets of sound or audio that are occurring that reinforce this. One of them is the battle that's happening in space, where as Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor have completed what they tried to get done. They got the plans, transmitted them, they've gotten out of the building, and the Death Star has shown up, and everyone realizes it. Cassian and Jyn look out over the horizon, and what's his name? Not Erso, Director Krennic. He's hurt, he's laying there, he's the whole crate of the Death Star. He looks up, and he sees over the crest of the horizon of the ocean, he sees, like, beyond the actual atmosphere of his planet, the Death Star like creeping up and just like slowly just rising, like the sun rising. And there's a certain sound that is occurring right there. There's a very finalic sort of like, well, here we are. And then you when the blast happens, when the single shot happens on the planet, and Jin and Cassian are sitting on the beach and like holding each other and like looking into the sunrise, which is not the sunrise, it's a blast on the planet that's destroying the entire planet. Like there's some audio playing, and then the way they look at each other and realize we've done what we needed to do. It's all good. Like we're just here. But you contrast it by the battle that's happening in space at the exact same time when Vader shows up with the 501st, and as he shows up, if you go back and listen to it, you'll notice that the sound effects of fighting are amplified, and the audio of music is almost like you put your fingers in your ears. Like you're hearing it through some earplugs. It's ever that the music is like pushed back because the battle is now happening, and it's a battle that you're not likely to win. It's interesting the difference between the two, because there's like this sullen, subdued, we're accepting what's happening down here on the planet, and nope, it's all going to happen. We're pushing that aside. You're going to have to deal with the battle now. It's very interesting, the differences between that at the end of that movie. It's probably one of my favorite Star Wars movies, specifically because of how well they do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I know we're running a little bit long tonight, so
I will say this. Michael Gianco, who is the composer for Rogue One, this could easily have been a music of the Lord of the Rings, but
we need to do some entire music episode.
The composer for that movie is also a composer for Lost. He also composed Up. He knows how to pull heartstrings, because he's really good at figuring out how to have notes drop in certain parts of songs that then that the melody isn't complete. Or like when the Death Star appears out of hyperspace at Scarif, Jeff, there's a completion of there's like a progression, and it's like it's a really weird completion, but it's to expose the finality. It's like this really subtle hint that it's like, yeah, that you guys aren't going to make it. It's that he's a really interesting composer. He cheated a lot on Lost, I think, because he knew that it's like a lot of big C's and G's. You know what I mean? Like it's these notes that are just built to like kind of build you up. And then minor chord, and it was like, oh gosh, like, but yeah, I love the whole package of what you see in a lot of these movies, because it's not just the visual, it's the audio, it's the music, it's everything. And Joanna, I think that you said it best, and I think this is where the Lord of the Rings edges out Star Wars, is when Alderaan explodes, it was hard to connect with that. You don't even see the planet. You just know that affects Princess Leia. And that's fine, because we're with that character in that moment. So we know that that's terrible for that character. But there is the omnipresent other character in Lord of the Rings is Middle-earth. The way that, Jeff, you were talking about Edoras, and how they mapped that perfectly, like the city on a hill surrounded by mountains, or the Shire, and the lived-in nature of it. That it's like what you're saying, Joanna, that there is this omnipresent character of Middle-earth, that we are fighting for this. And I feel like that is everywhere, that there's always this pullback where you see what they're fighting for.
And you can kind of feel their connection to Middle-earth. With like they like you real like we all are made of earth, right? Every one of us, our bodies are made of earth. This is the stuff of the planet that just organized itself into us. But we forget that, right? We like live in our heads and our computers, and we think that we're this separate thing and we're not earth. But in the movie, you really feel that these characters rose from this sacred land.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I love, actually, as you were both saying that, it's what it got me thinking is that all of the characters that are older, all the older the elegant characters, as we want to think of them, the Galadriels and Elrons and even the dwarves to some degree, it's almost like what they were all fighting for was then. They are still kind of trying to still fight for something that used to be around, and everybody now is fighting for the thing that they have right in front of them. And I think it almost is reinforced in how they're saying, we're fading away, we're leaving. It's like, right. And you're right to, not for a bad reason, but what the fight that you had has been the last 3 ages, the last 20 something thousand years, your fight is now done. Like what you were fighting for, that time is literally has passed. What's happening right now is a fight for the people who are here now, who are wanting to live in the moment. Like the Jedi would say, like, live in the here and now. The past is already done. You can't predict the future. You live in the moment that you're in right now. And that's almost, you see that so reinforced in Lord of the Rings, that these characters, these beings that need to leave because their fight is done. Their time has literally passed. It's not that they're not relevant anymore, but they're not for this time. It's not just that they're handing over to man or to the humans that are still there, non-Numenorians or whatever else, but that this new time is for them. They are the stuff of right now. And I think that's so interesting to think about.
So handing it off, I know we have to stop at some point, but I just want to
go. Yeah.
Handing it off to man, I think there's something to that. I know of many mythologists who would be quick and I think correct to point out that Galadriel is a woman, right? She's a female divine figure, and she's departing. Similarly, in Star Wars, in the episode you had me watch, Jeff, the daughter dies and is entombed. And so there's this death and passage of female divinities, which a lot of scholars say happened, in our history. Like, female divinities are no longer allowed. They have been killed in a sense, and mostly replaced by divinities who happen to be male. And there are questions: is that changing? Is that like, is there a new paradigm coming where divinity allows all kinds of genders, or maybe no gender is necessary? It was really interesting to me to see that imagery in the Star Wars episode, and then connect it as you're talking about Galadriel going into the West, like very, very resonant, like rhyming images in my mind.
Oh, I love that. I honestly think that is, again, this is why it's like, I love the study of religion at an academic level, and that's all religions and traditions throughout time, because I feel like unconsciously they permeate a lot of our artwork. That they are just these little bits of narrative thread, and I didn't think about that with Galadriel especially, that it's like, oh yeah, of course. And she's going off into the West, and she's the oldest and wisest being, the Athena, if you will, of this world, that helped to win the world. That is this source of wisdom, that if Frodo is successful in the destruction of the ring, as she says, he is like the footsteps of doom. I love that interpretation. That is brilliant. That is a brilliant interpretation.
I love it. And actually, something you got me onto a new tangent we need to do a whole episode probably on is, Ryan, is when you made the comment about the art, not religion, but these beliefs are the art. We can see it in the art. Thrawn would love you because Thrawn loves. Joanna, I didn't have you look into this, but one of the characters in Star Wars is a character called Thrawn. The Thrawn Yorodo is his name, and he is a race that is not part of the common part of the galaxy that we see. He's part of what they call like unknown space, where you can't easily travel through hyperspace. So the two parts never really interact with each other. But his character is very stoic. He's very quiet. He's very methodical. Doesn't express a lot of emotion. He's not very politically savvy, but he is a brilliant military tactician, like brilliant. And one of his like superpowers is he can read a culture's art. He can look at their art and develop entire tactics based off of the artwork, all types of art. And he's come up numerous times. Actually, have his books on the Timothy Zahn, who wrote his books, has like 2 trilogies he's put out in the last like 4 years from this character, and they are amazing to listen to watch to read through, because he spends a lot of time describing the character reading and understanding the artwork of an entire civilization to understand how they think emotionally, what their religious beliefs are like, their deities, that affects how they make decisions about the things that they do militarily and in society. And it's just that part alone is really amazing to read about. And it's a whole other topic I think that's interesting, that in Star Wars specifically, and I think they kind of do this in Lord of the Rings a little bit too, is there's no new, there isn't portrayed to be a lot of nuance in a civilization. Like in Star Wars, there is a planet. Naboo is a great example of this. The planet that Palpatine comes from and that Padme comes from. There's the capital city of Theed, and then all these other places people live. But there's no other big city. There's the capital city. And you see it with almost every planet in Star Wars, with the exception of the Egumenopolises like Coruscant or Chandrila. Other than those, most of them are, there's the planet and there's like a capital on the planet. So like people just live in outlying areas and there's like one center point like on every single planet. That's just like how they do it. Or the planet's culture is just the planet's culture. This is who these people are in every case, which is clearly not what like planet Earth is actually like at all. But that's how they do it in Star Wars. And it's so fascinating because I actually started thinking about that for Lord of the Rings. And they almost kind of do that in there. Like the elves are just this. The Gondorians are this way. The Rohirrim or the Rohan, the Rohirrim are just this way. In the Shire, they're just a certain way. Like it almost portrays them initially as if there's no nuance to them. They're all just a certain way. When we see in the movies, when we spend time with them, or when you do in the books and you spend time with the hobbits, each character, as an example, realizes the hobbits aren't. I mean, in the Hobbit itself is a great example of that, because the dwarves realize they thought the hobbits were just lazy people who smoked and all these things, and then they encounter Bilbo and they're like, wow. By the end of it, they're like, you are not at all what we thought you were. You are actually this other person. And it's so fascinating because you see this kind of this desire to put groups of people or beliefs into a particular box because it's just easy to do that, rather than breaking it up and realizing there's a lot here that you're not looking at that makes up all this other nuance. I don't know. I feel like there's at least a few episodes in just those ideas right there.
No, I like I don't know. I just like the how and there's like a cycle of this stuff, like how these things appear in artwork, how they appear in artwork of different cultures. I'm Mexican, and I know that a very big part of Mexican Catholic icons is like the Virgin of Guadalupe. What that means for Mexicans. Mexican Catholics, I should say. I don't want to say that. And by the way, like I don't know if that's the same for all I'm from California, so I'm gonna qualify all these things. But I what that means in our artwork, how that affects our artwork, how that affects the stories we tell. There's a really great book about that I feel like speaks to that cultural artistry. It's in Bless Me Ultima, and the roles that people play. This is what I mean by these things keep appearing, and they keep appearing in different ways. How we structure those stories, they appear in comic books. They appear through different cultures. Ryan Coogler's Black Panther, for example. Like, I feel like we could do a whole show on this, where how these stories are told through the lens of different cultures through time, whether it's Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings and the religious aspects there, George Lucas and Star Wars and what the Force means, especially in his East meets West philosophy, or even what we see now in like a lot of these Marvel movies, or the Matrix. I mean, come on, they're going all the way back to where we started, which was the Matrix. And I know that it's almost 10:30 p.m. Pacific time, but I'm just saying we could probably spend a whole show doing this. And Joanna, I know that we kept you here a half hour longer than we meant to.
Thank you so much for being here,
Joanna. We meandered our way through Middle Earth, but I would love and I'm sure I speak for Jeff here on this, I would be great to have you back just to talk about how those things are appearing in our artwork, and like how they tell different stories through time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my! Anytime. I love this show. You guys are the best.
Thank you so much for
I
being here.
love Bless Me Ultima. Oh, I love that book.
I've never read. I just pulled it up on Amazon. I will add it to my wish list immediately. I've never read it.
Yeah.
I will totally do that.
Yeah.
Well, listen, everybody who's here, thank you so much for being a part of the show. We really appreciate it. Call to action for everybody. I have to say, though, no matter what, you have to watch the Obi-Wan Kenobi trailer. Anybody who's watching, if you haven't seen it, watch it. Joanna, get off the show and spend like the 2 minutes to watch it before you go to bed. It is just well, that and the Lord of the Rings trailer, the two of those things together, you'll be like just in heaven for the night. You'll be like, I'm good.
A third trailer, Rich. You got to watch Star Trek: Strange New Worlds.
I will watch it as soon as I get inside.
That's also out too. And you can see
so
him
much.
You can see Captain Pike ride his horse Tango.
So much good content. So much good content. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Thank you again so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for sticking around. Have a wonderful night, and we will see you very, very soon.
Good night.
Oh, I am not. Where's my outro? No. I'm sorry, I failed again. Our outro scene did not play.
One outro.
Where is it? Let me see. No, we'll get this. Where is it? Happens every time. Every time. There it is. Try this again.
I think this is great because it's giving everybody a chance to see all your Tolkien stuff.
There we go.
Yeah. It's been a